All right, let's dive into a challenge that, let's be honest, is probably on the mind of a lot of IT leaders out there: the ever-rising costs of running those absolutely critical COBOL applications on the mainframe. We're going to explore how you can modernize these workhorses, reclaim some much-needed capacity, and finally get those costs back under control.
So let me just ask you this straight up. Does this sound familiar? You're watching your COBOL workloads just grow and grow, and it's pushing your hardware costs, your software costs, steadily up. If you're not in your head right now, you are definitely not alone. It's a huge pressure point, but the good news is there are some really smart ways to tackle it.
Okay, here's our game plan. First, we'll really define the mainframe cost challenge. Then, we'll look at what most people do, the standard upgrade path. After that, I'll introduce you to an alternative called Jopaz. We'll compare the two, see Jopaz in action in the real world, and then wrap it all up with the most important takeaways for you.
First things first, let's really get our heads around the problem. Why is managing the mainframe suddenly feeling like such a tightrope walk? Let's break down what's really going on. You know, the thing about these challenges is they don't happen in a vacuum. They all pile on top of each other. You've got these growing workloads that are just jacking up your operational costs. At the exact same time, the COBOL experts who know these systems inside and out are retiring, which leaves a massive skills gap. Then you throw in older tools that make development feel slow and clunky, and you can see why the idea of a full rip and replace project is just, well, it's way too risky and way too expensive for most to even think about. So with all that pressure, what's the first move organizations usually make? Well, typically it's upgrading to the latest and greatest compiler from IBM. So let's examine that standard path, the IBM COBOL V6 compiler. On paper, the idea behind the V6 compiler makes a lot of sense. It's built to give your old COBOL code a nice performance bump, cut down on CPU usage, which is where the costs really hit, and bolt on some modern features. It's pretty much IBM's mainline strategy for modernizing COBOL on the Z platform. But, and this is a huge but, it's a serious trade-off. Yeah, on the one hand, you get new features, better performance, and that great IBM support. But on the other side of the coin, the migration can be a beast. Why? Because this new compiler is much stricter, and it can actually break code that's been working perfectly for decades. This can lead to some nasty data validation surprises that need a ton of manual work to fix. And those performance gains you were promised, they're not always a given. You might have to do a lot of tuning to actually see them. So, all of this brings us to a totally different way of thinking about this problem. If the standard path is that complicated and that risky, there's got to be another option, right? Well, there is. Let's talk about a smarter approach. Introducing Jopaz. So what in the world is Jopaz? The easiest way to think about it is like a super smart translator. It takes your existing COBOL code as is and recompiles it into Java. Now here's the magic trick. That Java code can now run on these specialized, way more cost-effective processors on the mainframe called zIIP engines. Think of your main processor, the general processor, as the premium, expensive brain that gets billed at a high rate. The zIIP engines are like specialized coprocessors that are built for things like Java and are billed at a tiny fraction of the cost. And the best part of all? You don't have to rewrite a single line of your battle-tested COBOL code. The whole process is just brilliantly simple. Step 1, you recompile your COBOL apps. And again, no code changes. Step 2, you run that new Java code on a zip engine. It's kind of like moving a bunch of traffic off a jammed, expensive toll road and onto a brand new, cheaper express lane. And step 3, your applications still talk to all their data, DB2, VSM, whatever you've got, just like they always have. No risky data migration needed. Okay, so we've looked at the standard IBM way, and we've looked at the Jopaz approach. Let's put them side by side. This is where you can really see the fundamental differences in philosophy.
And this table just lays it all out, crystal clear. The IBM V6 upgrade, you could be looking at a ton of manual code changes. Jopaz, totally non-invasive. The main cost savings with V6 comes from hoping to use less of that expensive general processor. Jopaz saves you money by actively moving the work to the much cheaper zIIP engine. And that all flows directly into risk. The V6 upgrade is a high-risk, all-or-nothing project, while Jopaz is a low-risk approach you can roll out in phases.
And let's be clear about the scale of this workload shift. We're not talking about shaving off a few percentage points here and there. With Jopaz, you can potentially shift up to 80% of your COBOL batch processing off that expensive general processor.
That is an absolute game changer of a number.
And this chart just makes the impact so obvious. It's night and day, right? On the left, you've got your general processor just getting hammered by your COBOL workload. On the right, after Jopaz, that workload has just plummeted. You've literally just freed up a huge chunk of your most expensive computing power. You can now use that for new projects, or maybe just put off a very expensive hardware upgrade for a long, long time.
Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but does it actually work in the wild? You bet it does. Let's check out a success story from a major telecommunications company and see what this actually looks like.
So picture this. You're a big telecom company in Brazil. The government comes out with a new regulation that says you have to keep way more call data for much longer. This new rule is going to chew up a massive amount of processing power, which usually means only one thing: writing a very, very big check for a hardware upgrade.
But don't just take my word for it. Here's what their mainframe infrastructure manager had to say. This quote just nails it. They met the new regulations without buying more hardware, and they made their operations more efficient as a bonus. I mean, that's the dream outcome right there. So let's just break down that win. The challenge was tough. Meet new government rules, but keep costs down. The solution? They modernized 4,000 COBOL applications with Jopaz and moved that workload over to the zIIP engines. And the benefits? They were huge. They got into compliance quickly, they completely avoided that massive hardware upgrade, they lowered their CPU costs, and their batch jobs actually ran faster, which saved them manpower. It's a total win-win-win.
All right, we have covered a lot of ground. So as we start to land the plane here, what are the most critical things you need to walk away with?
If you only remember 3 things from this, make it these. First, Jopaz cuts down the workload on the most expensive part of your mainframe, your general processor, and that means immediate savings. Second, it's non-invasive. You don't touch your code, you don't move your data, you get to keep all that business logic you've spent years, even decades perfecting. And third, you're still running on the IBM Z platform, with all the rock-solid security, reliability, and performance that you count on.
And that really just leaves us with one final question to think about. If you could free up that much capacity on your mainframe, if you could dramatically cut your operating costs, what would you do with it? Would you launch that new AI project? Build out new customer-facing apps? With an approach like this, those innovative ideas can stop being what-ifs and start becoming what's next. Thanks for tuning in.